The air in the Pantheon suite smelled of power. Not the cheap, cloying scent of sprayed air freshener, but the layered aroma of old money and new ambition. Imported lilies, the faint tang of ozone from the silent air purifiers, and the rich, almost edible scent of aged leather from the furniture. For Amara, however, it mostly smelled like survival. Each polished surface, each perfectly plumped silk cushion, was another payment towards her sister's tuition. Another month of keeping their heads above water. Her hands, deft and sure, adjusted a heavy crystal glass on the marble-topped bar, ensuring it was precisely 1 inch from its neighbor. She moved with an economy of motion that was born of years of practice, a self-effacing grace designed to make her invisible. Brown skin, a crisp black uniform that marked her as staff, hair pulled back in a severe, disciplined knot. Her eyes, watchful and intelligent, were the only things she couldn't entirely control. They missed nothing. The faint scuff on the Italian loafers of the man who'd left an hour ago. The almost imperceptible tremor in the hotel manager's hand as he'd briefed them this morning. The way the light hit the Goryeo dynasty vase on the pedestal by the window. A piece reputedly worth more than Amara would make in a lifetime. Her life had once been a world of encrypted cables and geopolitical analysis, of briefings in sterile, windowless rooms where her fluency in the Busan dialect of Korean was a prized asset. She had been someone. Now she was a junior concierge in a hotel that catered to the kind of men she used to write reports about. The fall had been swift, brutal, and necessary. Her sister, Lena, was in her second year of medical school. The cost was astronomical, a crushing weight that Amara bore alone. This job, this humiliation, was her sacrifice. It was her armor. "He's on his way up, Mr. Kwan." The voice belonged to Mr. Huan, the floor manager, a man who seemed to perspire pure anxiety. He was trembling, his gaze darting around the suite, as if searching for an invisible flaw that would cost him his job. Everything is to his precise specifications. The temperature at 22 degrees Celsius, the water, Voss, the whiskey, a Yamazaki 18-year. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not make eye contact. You are furniture. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Amara's voice was a soft murmur, perfectly calibrated deference. The staff had been whispering about Kwon Ji-hoon for a week, the new owner of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, a name spoken in hushed tones in the back hallways, a ghost who was about to materialize on their floor. They said he was young, ruthless, that he'd consolidated power and soul with a speed that left his rivals in their graves or in exile. Amara felt a familiar, cold knot in her stomach. It was the feeling she used to get before a high-stakes briefing, the quiet hum of manageable danger. She straightened a magazine on the coffee table, her movements a study in controlled calm. In the corner of the lobby, she'd seen Chairman Park earlier, an elderly regular who always sat with a cup of barley tea, his quiet eyes following the hotel's daily drama. He'd given her a small, almost imperceptible nod. An odd gesture, but she'd returned it with a polite bow. He was a piece of the hotel's intricate ecosystem, a background detail she cataloged like any other. The private elevator chimed, a soft, melodic tone that sounded like a death knell. The doors slid open. He didn't walk into the room, he consumed it. Kwon Ji-hoon moved with a predatory stillness that made the air thicken. He was flanked by 2 men in identical dark suits, their faces blank, their bodies coiled springs of potential violence. The room, which had felt vast in opulent moments before, suddenly seemed to shrink around him. Was a Patek Philippe, a watch whose value was a Patek Philippe, a watch whose value could have paid for Lena's entire medical education, residency included. His black hair was expertly cut, and his face was a mask of cold, handsome indifference. Then his eyes, the last part of him you noticed, found hers. They were dark, calculating, and utterly devoid of warmth. They swept over her, cataloging her uniform, her posture, her purpose, and dismissed her in less than a second. He had seen a tool, not a person. He moved to the bar without a word, his men taking up positions by the door. He ignored the whiskey Mr. Huan had so nervously arranged and poured himself a glass of water. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Amara stood perfectly still. The suite seemed to hold its breath. This was the world she now inhabited. Ji-hoon turned from the bar, his gaze. Ji-hoon turned from the bar, his gaze sweeping the room again. It was a methodical, analytical scan, the kind a predator makes of new territory. His eyes lingered on the priceless Celadon vase, the one Amara had been admiring earlier. It stood on a black lacquer pedestal, bathed in the afternoon light pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, his cold expression flickered with something unreadable. He took a slow sip of his water, his movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. Amara remained by the far wall, her hands clasped behind her back, a portrait of subservience. Her job was to be present but unseen, ready to anticipate a need before it was voiced. She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, a small island of control in the silent, high-stakes tension of the room. He set the glass down with a soft click. Then he walked towards the vase. He didn't stumble. He didn't trip. With a single fluid motion of his arm, he swept the Goryeo Dynasty antique from its pedestal. The sound of it shattering on the marble floor was obscene, a violent, percussive crack that echoed in the cavernous room like a gunshot. Shards of pale green ceramic, history turned to dust and debris, skittered across the polished stone. Amara's breath hitched. Her training, her discipline, everything screamed at her to remain still, to not react. But her heart hammered against her ribs. Before the last echo of the crash had faded, the suite doors burst open. Choi Min-jun, the hotel owner's son, strode in, his face a mask of puffed-up indignation. He was flanked by two burly hotel security guards, their presence more for show than actual effect. Min-jun was a man who performed his power, loud and ostentatious, a stark contrast to the deadly quiet of the man standing by the window. "What in the hell was that?" Min-jun's voice was a high-pitched bark. His eyes, small and porcine, scanned the room and immediately fixed on the two figures within it, the powerful mob boss and the black waitress. His brain, wired for cruelty and cowardice, made the only calculation it knew how. It chose the weakest target. His gaze snapped to Amara. He didn't even acknowledge Kwon Ji-hoon, who stood motionless, watching the scene unfold with the dispassionate air of a man observing a scientific experiment. "You!" Min-jun pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Amara. "What did you do?" Amara stood frozen. The accusation was so swift, so baseless, it stole the air from her lungs. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, but no words came out. Beside her, Mr. Huan began to sweat profusely, dabbing at his forehead with a shaking hand. "Clumsy, incompetent fool!" Min-jun's voice rose, each word a public lashing. He strode over to the wreckage, gesturing wildly. "Do you have any idea what this was? This was a national treasure, worth more than your entire miserable life." He turned back to her, his face contorted in a sneer. He switched to Korean, the words fast and contemptuous, designed to exclude and humiliate her, assuming complete ignorance on her part. "Look at this stupid black bitch. Probably can't even tell the difference between priceless art and a chamber pot. These animals have no place in a place of refinement." The racist slur, delivered in a language she knew as well as her own, landed like a physical blow. It was meant to. The other Korean staff in the doorway flinched but said nothing. They looked away. Everyone looked away. Amara's world narrowed to the space between one heartbeat and the next. She could feel the stares of the staff, the weight of Min-jun's smug cruelty, the crushing injustice of it all. And through it all, she was acutely aware of Kwon Ji-hoon standing by the window, watching, silent. He had done this. He had broken the vase, and he was letting her take the fall. He said nothing. His silence was its own form of violence, a casual endorsement of the scene playing out before him. "You're fired," Min-jun spat, switching back to English for the final, performative blow. "Obviously, and the cost of this vase will be coming out of your final paycheck, all of it. I'll see you blacklisted from every hotel in this city." The threat was absolute. Lena's tuition, their apartment, everything she had sacrificed for, everything she had built on this fragile foundation of servitude, was gone, shattered on the floor with the ancient pottery. For 3 seconds, Amara said nothing. 3 seconds where the weight of her sister's future pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. 3 seconds where the years of swallowing her pride, of making herself small and invisible, warred with the woman she used to be, the analyst, the strategist, the survivor. 3 seconds where she made a decision. Survival was no longer about deference. It was about war. The shift was imperceptible at first, A subtle change in the air around her. Her shoulders, which had been curved in a posture of apology, straightened. Her chin lifted. The mask of the deferential servant dissolved, replaced by something cold, sharp, and dangerous. She met Choi Min-jun's gaze directly, and for the first time, he seemed to see the person behind the uniform. He faltered for a fraction of a second, thrown by the sudden, absolute lack of fear in her eyes. The silence that followed was deathly. It was the silence of a chessboard after a devastating, unexpected move. Then Amara spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the suite, each syllable perfectly formed, each tone dripping with ice. She spoke in Korean, not the polite, formal Seoul dialect of a student, but the rough, gravelly cadence of the Busan docks, laced with the specific cutting slang of the criminal underworld, a language he would understand intimately. A Goryeo dynasty original? The words were a soft, deadly caress. That's a bold claim for a piece that was fired in a Macau back alley kiln last March. The forger's name is Chen. They call him Snakehead. He has a particular tell, a slight imperfection in the glaze on the inner lip. You might want to check your receipts. The room went absolutely still. Mr. Huan stopped breathing. Min-jun's face, which had been flushed with rage, went the color of ash. The security guards froze, their eyes wide. They had just witnessed a waitress, a black woman they assumed was an outsider, speak their language not just fluently, but with the authority of an insider. Amara took a small step forward. The hunter was no longer the hunted. "And while we're discussing finances," she continued, her voice never rising, "you should probably be more careful about the conversations you have in your own office. The audio on your security cameras is surprisingly clear. For example, the one where you discussed routing payments for your service contracts through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Vixen Hospitality, I believe it's called. An interesting name for a company that seems to specialize in importing young women from the Philippines." Choi Min-jun staggered back as if she had physically struck him. A strangled noise escaped his throat. This wasn't just an accusation, it was a surgical strike. The specificity of it, the cold, factual delivery, was terrifying. He looked around wildly, his gaze landing on his security, on the manager, searching for an ally, but their faces reflected only shock and a dawning fear. He had lost control of the room. Who are you?" he stammered in Korean, his bluster completely gone. Amara allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. "Just a waitress with good ears." It was then that Kwon Ji-hoon finally moved. He pushed himself off the wall, his movements still unhurried. But now they held a new weight, a new purpose. He walked past the shattered vase, past the sputtering Choi Min-jun, and stopped a few feet from Amara. He didn't look at her with dismissal anymore. He looked at her with the sharp, assessing gaze of a predator who has just discovered another, unexpected predator in its territory. There was no apology in his eyes, but there was a flicker of something else. Recognition. "You," Ji-hoon said, his voice a low rumble. "My office, 10 minutes." It wasn't a request. It was a summons. He turned and walked out of the suite, his silent guards falling into step behind him, leaving Amara alone in the wreckage of her old life and the terrifying, uncertain dawn of a new one. Choi Min-jun stared after him, then back at Amara, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. The game had changed. The pieces were no longer where he thought they were, and the pawn he had tried to sacrifice had just put his king in check. The private office was on a restricted floor, a place Amara had never been. The air here smelled different, not of lilies and polish, but of cigar smoke, expensive scotch, and something metallic and cold. The walls were paneled in dark, gleaming wood, and a single massive desk dominated the space, its surface clear save for a laptop and a crystal ashtray. Kwon Ji-hoon stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, his back to her. Amara entered without a sound. She felt the gaze of his two guards at the door, but she ignored them. Her fear had burned away in the fire of her confrontation with Min-jun, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. She was no longer an employee waiting to be disciplined. She was a free agent entering a negotiation. He turned slowly. For a long moment, he simply studied her, his dark eyes searching for... what? Weakness? Deceit? She met his gaze without flinching, her posture straight, her hands steady at her sides. Busan dialect, he stated, his voice flat. And Jopak terminology. Where did a person like you learn that? A person like you. The words hung in the air, laden with assumptions about her race, her gender, her station. I had a good teacher, Amara replied, her voice even. A foster father. He was from Busan. He believed a practical education was important. She left out that her foster father had been a mid-level boss in the Hyosindang Pa, a man who had taken her in as a teenager and taught her survival in a language of codes, hierarchies, and violence before he was betrayed and killed. Ji-hoon's expression didn't change, but she saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew exactly what kind of practical education she meant. Choi Min-jun planted a listening device in that vase, he said, getting straight to the point. It was a gift from a rival family, a Trojan horse. I needed an excuse to destroy it without revealing I knew what it was. Your presence was convenient. There it was, no apology, no remorse. A cold, tactical admission. She was collateral damage in his war. My convenience cost me my job and my ability to pay for my sister's medical school, Amara shot back, her voice like steel. A temporary problem, he dismissed. I am prepared to offer you a solution. He gestured to the chair opposite his desk. It was an invitation, a shift in their dynamic. She was no longer the staff he could ignore. She was someone to be addressed. She sat, her movements fluid and deliberate. Choi Min-jun is a problem for me as well, Ji-hoon continued, taking his own seat. He is reckless, stupid, and his side businesses are attracting the wrong kind of attention from federal authorities. Attention that could spill over onto my own, more discreet operations. I want him gone. You could have him killed, Amara stated, testing him. Messy, Ji-hoon replied, echoing her own thoughts. Death makes a martyr. It invites investigation and vendettas. I prefer a cleaner method. Ruin, complete, public, financial, and social annihilation. I want his partners to desert him, his accounts frozen, his name to become a synonym for disgrace. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. You have skills, observation, analysis, a unique ability to move through his world unnoticed. And you have a motive. He humiliated you. He threatened your family's future. I am offering you the chance to be the instrument of his downfall. It wasn't a rescue. It was a job offer, a contract. He was offering her a weapon and a target. What are your terms? She asked, her voice pure business. I will provide you with everything you need, a secure workspace, access to my information network, unlimited funds, and protection for you and your sister. Your sister's tuition will be paid in full for the entirety of her education, effective immediately. The offer was staggering. It was freedom. It was security. It was everything she had been fighting for. But she was no one's pawn. And in return, she pressed, you will give me Choi Min-jun. You will comb through his life, his finances, his secrets. You will find the lever that, when pulled, will bring his entire corrupt empire crashing down. You will design the plan. My people will provide the muscle and the infrastructure, but you will be the architect. This was the core of the deal. He wasn't hiring an asset. He was commissioning a strategist. He was giving her the platform, but she had to build the weapon and fire it herself. It was a trade between equals, forged in the crucible of a shattered vase. I have one condition, Amara said, her gaze unwavering. When the time comes, I'm the one who faces him. I'm the one who pulls the lever. This is my fight, too. I will finish it. A long silence stretched between them. Ji-hoon studied her, his face an unreadable mask. She could see the calculations happening behind his eyes. He was weighing the risk, the unprecedented nature of her demand. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. Agreed, he said. For your immediate expenses. The key is to a condominium downtown. It's clean, secure. My driver will take you there. You start tomorrow. Amara took the items. The cool, heavy plastic of the card and the cold metal of the key felt like the instruments of her new reality. She had walked into the Pantheon suite as a servant. She was walking out as a weapon. As she rose to leave, she paused at the door. The man in the lobby bar, she said. Chairman Park, who is he to you? Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed slightly. He is a relic from a past generation, A man who believes in old codes. Why? He knew, Amara said quietly. He watched me every day. He knew I wasn't just a waitress. Today he nodded at me, like a warning. Or an encouragement. Ji-hoon was silent for a moment. Chairman Park sees things others do not, he finally said. It seems you and he have that in common. The condominium was a sterile, beautiful cage of glass and steel overlooking the city. It was worlds away from her cramped apartment, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a barracks. Amara spent the first night not sleeping, but working. With the burner laptop and encrypted access Ji-hoon provided, she began to build a digital ghost of Choi Min-jun's life. She started with Vixen Hospitality. It was the thread she had pulled in the suite, and she knew it would lead to the heart of his rot. For days, she was a blur of focused energy, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage. She cross-referenced shipping manifests with employee rosters, traced wire transfers through a labyrinth of offshore banks, and parsed whispers from Ji-hoon's network of informants. He had given her the raw data. She was refining it into a weapon. The picture that emerged was uglier than she had imagined. Min-jun wasn't just skimming from the hotel. He was using its service contracts as a front for a human trafficking ring. Young women were brought in under the guise of hospitality work, their passports seized, their wages garnished into oblivion, trapping them in a cycle of debt and exploitation. Vixen Hospitality wasn't just a shell corporation. It was the legal entity that owned their debt. He wasn't just a corrupt hotelier, he was a slaver. The cold anger in Amara's chest solidified into a block of ice. This was no longer just about revenge for her humiliation. It was about justice for the women whose names she was now cataloging, the ghosts who moved through the same back hallways she had. Only their invisibility was a prison, not a disguise. One afternoon, Ji-hoon appeared at the condo without warning. He found her surrounded by monitors, her eyes tracing lines of code across a screen. My sources say Min-jun has a warehouse down by the docks where he processes his new arrivals, he said, his voice clipped. I'm sending a team tonight. We'll burn it to the ground. Amara didn't look up from her screen. No, she said. The word hung in the air. One of his men, standing by the door, shifted his weight uncomfortably. No one said no to Kwon Ji-hoon. Ji-hoon's eyes narrowed. Explain. An attack on the warehouse is loud, she said, finally turning to face him. Her voice was calm, analytical, the voice of the strategist he'd hired. It's messy, you might rescue a few women tonight, but Min-jun will scatter. The network will go underground, and the rest of the victims will be lost for good. You'll be fighting shadows, and it gives him an enemy to rally against, a fire, an attack by a rival syndicate. He becomes a victim. She stood and walked to a large whiteboard she had set up, covered in names, dates, and arrows connecting shell corporations. You don't win by attacking his muscle. You win by making his money toxic. You expose the trafficking links to his legitimate partners, the banks that finance him, the corporations that hold events at his hotel, the politicians he has on his payroll. You don't burn down a single warehouse. You poison the entire well. You make it so no one will touch his money, so his allies run from him like he's a disease. That is ruin. Ji-hoon was silent, his gaze fixed on the whiteboard. He was seeing the architecture of his enemy's empire laid bare, not as a collection of targets to be hit, but as a complex financial organism whose circulatory system she was preparing to fill with poison. He was a man of violence and direct action. Her approach was surgical, insidious, and far more devastating. He was looking at a war fought on a battlefield he barely understood. This will take longer, he said, a statement of fact, not an objection. It will be permanent, she countered. He gave a slow nod. What do you need? Access to the hotel's main server room. I need to get inside their central accounting system, and I need a distraction, a big one. The plan required her to go back inside the lion's den, a solo operation. Ji-hoon didn't like it. She could see the tension in his jaw, but he had agreed to her terms. She was the architect. Days later, dressed in the gray uniform of a third-party IT technician, Amara walked through the service entrance of the hotel. Her heart hammered a steady, controlled rhythm. To any observer, she was just another contractor, her face obscured by a baseball cap, her hands holding a toolbox. Inside that box, beneath a false bottom, was a set of tools that had nothing to do with network cables. Her distraction arrived on schedule. A staged brawl, orchestrated by Ji-hoon's men, erupted in the main lobby bar. It was loud, chaotic, and spectacular, drawing every security guard on duty. In the ensuing confusion, Amara slipped through a service corridor and down to the sub-basement where the server room was located. The air was cold, humming with the sound of cooling fans. The room was her element. She bypassed the electronic lock with a device from her toolbox and slipped inside. Rows of humming servers blinked in the darkness. She found the accounting server, her fingers flying across the keys of a portable terminal as she attached a data cloning device. She had 10 minutes max. As the data transferred, a notification pinged on her burner phone, a text from Lena. "Some strange men just came to my apartment building. They were asking the doorman about me. I got scared and called campus security. They're gone now. Are you okay, Amara? What's going on?" Ice flooded Amara's veins. Min Jun. He was getting desperate. He was reaching for her weak point. The progress bar on her screen was at 80%. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get to her sister. But she held her ground. Running now would mean this was all for nothing. Lena would never be truly safe until Min Jun was destroyed. 90%. She typed a quick reply to Lena. "Stay on campus. Don't go back to your apartment. I'm handling it. I love you." The clone finished. She disconnected her gear, slipped it back into the toolbox, and erased her entry log from the system. She was a ghost again. As she left the server room, she saw two of Min Jun's personal security men coming down the corridor. They hadn't seen her yet. She didn't panic. She ducked into a small janitorial closet, her back pressed against the cool concrete, holding her breath. She heard their heavy footsteps pass, their voices muttering in Korean. "He's getting paranoid. Wants us to sweep the whole floor. After what that black girl said, I'd be paranoid too." They passed. Amara waited a full minute before slipping out and making her way back to the surface. She had the data. She had what she needed to burn his world to the ground. But the fear for Lena was a cold, hard knot in her gut. Ji-hoon's protection had been reactive. It had to become a fortress. When she returned to the condo, Ji-hoon was there, his face like a thundercloud. He already knew about the incident at Lena's apartment. "This has gone too far," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "He threatened your family. That crosses a line. My men will take him tonight." "No," Amara said again, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "You'll start a gang war, and you'll be doing exactly what he expects. He's trying to provoke you into a violent response he can use against you. We are not going to play his game. We are going to finish ours." She walked to the whiteboard and drew a large circle around a date 2 weeks from now. The Pan-Asian Hospitality Summit. "This is where we end it," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "He's the keynote speaker. The entire industry will be there. His partners, his financiers, the media. He'll be on a stage, under a spotlight. And that's where I'll strip him bare for the entire world to see." She turned to face Ji-hoon, her eyes blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "He threatened my sister. So I'm not just going to ruin him, I'm going to erase him." There was a moment where she thought he would overrule her, a moment where the cold, violent logic of his world would win out. But he looked from her fiery eyes to the cold, intricate plan on the board, and he saw the truth. Her way was more final, more absolute. "I'm moving your sister tonight," he said, "to a secure location. She will be protected by my best men. She will not be touched. I give you my word." It was the closest he had ever come to an expression of personal responsibility, of care. Amara nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Thank you." "Do what you must," he said, his eyes holding hers. "Bring him down." For the next 2 weeks, Amara worked with a singular, ferocious focus. She barely ate, barely slept. The data from the hotel's servers was a treasure trove, confirming the trafficking, uncovering massive fraud, tax evasion, and a network of bribes that reached into the highest levels of city government. She synthesized it all into a presentation, a narrative of pure criminality so clear and undeniable that no one could refute it. It was the most important report of her life. Ji-hoon's people worked in the background, setting the stage. They created a new identity for her, Amara Kane, a senior partner at a boutique risk advisory firm based in Singapore. They secured her a place on the summit's agenda, right after Min Jun's keynote, under the guise of presenting a report on emerging financial risks in the hospitality sector. The night of the summit, Amara stood before the mirror in her new suite at a rival hotel. The woman looking back was a stranger. The drab uniform was gone, replaced by a custom-made power suit of deep cobalt blue, its cut subtly echoing the lines of a modern hanbok. Her hair was styled in an elegant upsweep, and a single perfect diamond glittered at her ear. A gift from Ji-hoon, left on her dresser with no note. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was part of the costume, a signifier of wealth and power. Ji-hoon entered the room behind her. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the embodiment of dangerous elegance. He didn't speak, but his eyes met hers in the mirror. There was a silent question in his gaze. "Are you ready?" She turned to face him, her expression serene, her hands steady. "He made me invisible," she said, her voice quiet. "Tonight, I'm going to make sure he's the one no one can see." The grand ballroom of the Choi Imperial Hotel was a sea of black ties and glittering gowns. The air hummed with the sound of clinking champagne glasses and self-important chatter. At the head of the room, on a brightly lit stage, Choi Min-jun was in his element. He basked in the spotlight, his voice booming through the sound system as he spoke of integrity, innovation, and the bright future of his family's empire. He was announcing a merger with a massive international conglomerate, a deal that would make him untouchable. Amara entered from a side door, Ji-hoon a few steps behind her, a silent shadow. Heads turned as she walked down the central aisle. She was a striking, unfamiliar figure, and her progress toward the stage was a ripple of curiosity in the opulent crowd. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace, her eyes fixed on the man on the stage. Min-jun saw her. His flowery speech faltered. His eyes widened, a flicker of confusion, then dawning recognition. The waitress, the black woman from the penthouse suite. But it couldn't be. This woman wore her power like a second skin. She radiated an authority that chilled him to the bone. He stumbled over a word, his professional mask cracking for a fatal second. Amara didn't stop until she reached the short steps leading to the stage. She ascended them as if she owned them. A stagehand moved to intercept her, but a sharp, almost imperceptible gesture from one of Ji-hoon's men in the wings made him freeze. She walked to the podium, stopping next to the sputtering Min-jun. She leaned into the microphone, her voice cool and clear, carrying to every corner of the silent, waiting ballroom. "Mr. Choi speaks of a bright future," she began, her gaze sweeping across the stunned audience. "But a future built on a foundation of lies is no future at all. It is a prison." Min-jun found his voice. "Security! Get this woman off the stage. Who is she?" "My name is Amara Kane," she said, turning to look directly at him. The pity in her eyes was more devastating than any anger could have been. "And you and I have met before, though I was wearing a different uniform then." Behind them, the large screen that had been displaying the hotel's logo flickered. It was replaced by a bank statement. Vixen Hospitality. A wire transfer for $200,000 to a known human trafficker in Manila. A collective gasp went through the room. Min-jun's face went white. "This is a lie! Slander! My systems have been hacked." "Your systems were not hacked, Mr. Choi." Amara's voice cut through his panic like a scalpel. "They were audited." For the next 10 minutes, Amara systematically dismantled Choi Min-jun's life. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With the cold precision of an intelligence analyst delivering a final report, she walked the audience through his entire criminal enterprise. The screen behind her cycled through spreadsheets, encrypted emails she had decrypted, and finally, surveillance photos from the dockside warehouse, photos of the young, terrified women he had trafficked. The ballroom was utterly silent, save for the sound of Amara's voice and the frantic, panicked breathing of Choi Min-jun. His powerful partners in the front row stared at him with horror and disgust. The men from the international conglomerate were already on their phones, their billion-dollar merger evaporating into thin air. When she was finished, Amara turned off the microphone. The presentation on the screen was replaced by a single, high-resolution photo of the shattered Celadon vase on the marble floor of the Pantheon suite, a structural echo of his first act of cruelty, now a symbol of his complete and utter ruin. Min-jun collapsed. Not literally, but his entire being seemed to implode. The bluster, the arrogance, the performative power, it all vanished, leaving a hollow, pathetic man. "Please, he whispered, his voice cracking, reaching a hand toward her. Please, I'll give you anything. Amara looked at his pleading face, at the man who had tried to destroy her over a piece of pottery he hadn't even known was a fake. She thought of Lena, of the women in the photos, of the years she had spent making herself small to survive in a world built by men like him. You have nothing left to give, she said. Her voice was not triumphant. It was a simple statement of fact. As if on cue, the ballroom doors at the back of the room opened. Uniformed federal agents filed in, their movements calm and professional. They were the cleanup crew. They walked past the stunned guests. Their destination, the man, walked off the stage. Leaving the chaos walked off the stage, leaving the chaos behind her. She didn't look back. As she reached the aisle, Ji-hoon was there. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. He simply fell into step beside her, a silent guard of honor, as they walked out of the ballroom and into the night, leaving the ruins of Choi Min-jun's empire for the jackals to pick clean. 6 months later, the air in the boardroom smelled of brewing coffee, new carpet, and the quiet confidence of a company on the rise. Kane Risk Advisory occupied the top floor of a new glass tower downtown. From her corner office, Amara could see the entire city spread out below her, including the Choi Imperial Hotel, now under new management. She stood at the head of a long, polished table, clicking through a presentation for a new client, a shipping magnate concerned about vulnerabilities in his supply chain. Her team of analysts, sharp, young, and diverse, listened with rapt attention. She was no longer a ghost, she was a commander. Her voice was firm, her analysis sharp, her recommendations clear and actionable. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. On the corner of her desk sat a framed photo of Lena, beaming in her white coat at her pinning ceremony. Her tuition was a worry of the past. Her future was secure. After the meeting, as her team filed out, Kwon Ji-hoon entered. He moved with the same predatory grace, but his presence in her space was different now. It was not an intrusion, it was a familiar gravity. He looked around the office, at the bustling activity, at the photo of her sister. He never smiled, but the coldness in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, deep-seated respect. He placed a small, exquisitely carved wooden box on her desk. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black silk, was a single, intricately designed key. The ownership transfer of the hotel was finalized this morning, he said. My organization now holds the controlling interest. Amara looked at the key, then up at him. And this is for? The Pantheon Suite, he replied. It's yours, a reminder. It wasn't a gift. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a symbol, a trophy of a war they had won together. A testament to the fact that the place of her greatest humiliation was now a place she owned. She picked up the key, its weight solid and real in her hand. The object of her oppression had become a symbol of her triumph. She walked to the window, Ji-hoon joining her. Justice, she had learned, wasn't something that was easy to find. Justice, she had learned, wasn't something you were given. It was something you took, with your own 2 hands. She had earned this, every bit of it. She was no longer a victim, an asset, or a weapon. She was Amara Kane. And she was finally home, not in a place, but in the quiet, powerful truth of being fully, completely, and unapologetically herself. What would you have done? If you enjoyed this story of justice and reversal, be sure to like and subscribe for more.